If Mobile World Congress 2018 showed us anything, it's that there's still a lot of innovation surrounding cameras in our mobile devices. Smartphones like the Samsung Galaxy S9 and the Sony Xperia XZ2 managed to push the innovations in cameras just a little bit more. Well, that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone because cameras in general are features that users would probably proclaim as being one of the most important in a phone. While these are just two examples of the latest innovations when it comes to smartphone cameras, there have been many other innovations in the past that have paved the way for them. So in this video, we're going to go back down memory lane to uncover some of the most innovative camera-centric phones that push the limits. So this list I'm going to go through is arranged in chronological order just to provide better oversight in a chain of events that allow these camera innovations to really flourish and become reality. So with that in mind, here is a brief history on some of the most innovative camera-centric phones. We're starting off with the Sony Ericsson T68i. Back in the early 2000s, cell phones were just cell phones. They were meant for just phone calls and nothing more. The Sony Ericsson T68i was very important for several reasons and had a lot of firsts. But one in particular really stands out from the pack, and that's the optional attachable camera you could buy with it. It was one of the few phones to be able to snap photos at the time, so having that option was extraordinary by itself. Carrying an extra accessory in your pocket wasn't the most convenient solution when it comes to snapping photos, so it didn't take long for manufacturers to incorporate built-in cameras. And that's what we got with the Nokia 7650, which is also notable for being the first Nokia device to run the company's Symbian platform. More importantly though, it was one of the first commercially successful phones with a built-in camera. Similarly, we had this flip phone from Sanyo, which was released in December 2002. It was the SCP-5300. It was one of the first phones released in the US with a built-in camera, and back then it had a cutting-edge 0.3 megapixel camera. That means still shots had a maximum resolution of 640 by 480, so we're talking about VGA, which doesn't seem impressive, but back then it surely was. Fast forward to 2005, and the next innovation in cameras was seen with the Nokia N90. It's instantly memorable because of its design. It's a flip phone by default, but it featured a swiveling display that made it seem like it was a camcorder. It featured a 2 megapixel camera, and it's also notable for being the first Nokia to pack Carl Zeiss optics, an integrated flash, and the ability to record video with audio. Nokia was a dominant force throughout the early and mid-2000s, and the next device that really stood out was the N95, which was released in 2007. It was a huge overhaul versus the company's prior phones, and it showed us that camera phones were capable of rivaling dedicated point-and-shoot cameras. There was also some degree of depth added to its camera app because it featured controls for things like white balance, the scene modes, exposure compensation, and even various burst modes. Samsung might be a force now in the landscape, but it was still trying to establish itself back in the late 2000s. They made their first serious attempt with the Samsung Pixon. Aesthetically, it looked like a traditional point-and-shoot camera, but of course, it was in a slimmer form factor. And it was also one of the first to reach the 8 megapixel count with its camera, which surprisingly enough delivered really good quality for a phone. But they didn't waste any time pushing the boundaries because its successor, the 2009 release Pixon 12, it came out swinging by being the first phone to feature a 12 megapixel camera with an f2.6 lens. It was really rare for phones during this time period to feature double-digit megapixel counts with their cameras, so this was a very big deal for Samsung. We know that the original iPhone is no doubt one of the most revolutionary phones of all time, but it wasn't until the release of the 4th generation iPhone 4 in 2010 that people started to take Apple seriously when it comes to snapping photos. It was armed with a 5 megapixel backside illuminated sensor paired with an f2 lens and allowed just about anyone to just quickly snap photos with stunning detail and composition. On top of that, it ushered in the era of usable video chatting courtesy of its front-facing VGA camera and FaceTime. Now technically, this next pair that I'll be talking about did change the way we captured content with cameras, but it's arguable to admit if it's innovative in the grand scheme of things. Both the HTC Evo 3D and the LG Thrill 4G arrived onto the US market in 2011, bringing forth dual cameras that allow them to capture photos and videos in 3D. And people viewed this as a novelty, but it nonetheless delivered a new format for capturing content that we haven't seen before. Just when camera phones were pushing into the double-digit range, the Nokia 808 PureView decided to go overboard by demolishing everything else with its astounding 41 megapixel PureView camera. It featured the largest sensor at the time for a camera phone, and it had an f2.4 Zeiss all-spherical one-group lens. So the technology in it allowed it to deliver lossless zoom and superior low-light performance. Looking back at it now, it's really unbelievable for the Nokia 808 PureView to really go into that 41 megapixel range, and that's probably why it's still highly acclaimed now. Capitalizing on the innovations they established with the 808 PureView, Nokia's next major camera iteration took about a year to happen with the Windows Phone-powered Lumia 1020. It came with an improved 41 megapixel backside illuminated sensor with OIS, an f2.2 lens, and a 6-element Zeiss optics. The photos and videos it produced were just superb, but users really appreciate the extensive manual controls that the phone offered too. And they did manage to fit all those components in a better looking design phone. By the time 2013 came around, Samsung was quickly becoming a force thanks to the release of the Galaxy S4. Soon after that phone, we saw a slew of variants, with one of them being the camera-centric Samsung Galaxy S4 Zoom. For Samsung, they went with a different strategy because they added a 10 times optical zoom with its 16 megapixel CMOS sensor. This was definitely a different approach than what Nokia did, and it's really versatile because of that range. It allowed users to get very close without any degradation in quality that usually occurs with digital zoom. Dual cameras are rampant amongst today's smartphones, but the idea really took off with the arrival of the HTC One M8 in early 2014. The year before, HTC introduced us to its ultra-pixel technology with the M7, but the M8 tacked on a second camera that was used in conjunction with that main 4-megapixel ultra-pixel camera. So essentially, the secondary camera was strictly there for depth information. So after you snap a photo, you could select what regions of the photograph you want to remain in focus, while a bokeh effect is applied to the rest. With the advent of the front-facing camera in smartphones, we soon started to see this new trend of people snapping photos of themselves. Enter the selfie, and the phone that really emphasized it a lot was the HTC Desire Eye, which was released in 2014. The phone just didn't focus on the rear camera. Instead, they fashioned an equally capable front-facing camera, a 13 megapixel BSI sensor with an f2.2 aperture. There's no denying that the front-facing camera got a lot of attention, and it's no wonder why it's dubbed as the selfie phone, even to this day. While Nokia crammed as many megapixels as possible into its cameras, Panasonic's approach with the Lumix DMC CM1 in 2014 was different. In fact, they opted to put in a larger size sensor in the phone. It beat out the PureView cameras from before. It featured a 20 megapixel 1-inch sensor with a Leica lens. And with that, it's able to gather in more light, producing really good shots even in low light situations. And to date, the CM1 still holds the record for having the largest sensor in a phone. Most phones really stress their still shot photography performance over video, but that all changed with the LG V10 in the fall of 2015. It opened the gates up for content creators who love to tell their stories through the power of video. It successfully introduced us to manual video controls, so you can adjust parameters like the shutter speed, the ISO, the white balance, and even focus. Prior to it, most video recording was relegated to just automatic capture, so the arrival of manual controls really changed things tremendously. It also sported dual front-facing cameras, which offered wider capture when it came to selfies. Despite being a failure for other reasons, the LG G5 did at least introduce us to a concept that wasn't really explored all that much with other phones. Yes, it was armed with dual rear cameras, but its implementation was different because it offered a wider capture. The secondary 8-megapixel camera in particular allowed its reach to cover 135 degrees, so it allowed for more of the scenery to be visible than other phones. Strangely enough, Motorola never took to the same aggressive approach that its rivals pursued with its cameras. But they did establish something innovative with the modular design of its Moto Z line of phones. Then in the summer of 2016, they released the Hasselblad True Zoom camera, which was basically an add-on Moto mod that transformed this standard camera into a capable bridge camera. Not only did it feature a 12 megapixel camera, but it also had a 10 times optical zoom, so you could basically convert it from a standard smartphone camera to something far more versatile. And that leads us to the last phones on our list here. That is the Google Pixel 2 and the Pixel 2 XL. Yes, it's a 12 megapixel camera in both phones, and it looks rather conventional, but they're innovative in how they achieve stunning results thanks to software tweaking and optimizations. They're capable of capturing some professional grade portraits with only a single camera, as opposed to the dual systems that most phones offer. The technology behind it analyzes every pixel in the photo to cast that bokeh effect, and it was also something that was available with the front-facing camera. And that's about it, folks. I know I went through a lot of different phones, some of them memorable, some of them you might not really recall, but I know there are probably some I didn't mention as well. I'd really like to know what other phones you think should have made this list, so if you could just leave a message in the comments below, I'll definitely take a look. So if you guys want to learn more about any of the devices I talked about in this video, you can check out our website, PhoneArena.com. This is John V, signing off.